All right. Good afternoon. Let's get started. Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, told the Security Council by video teleconference in its meeting this morning that yesterday was a day of tragedy for the people of Gaza. He said that there's no justification for the killing and there's no excuse. He called on all to join him in condemning, in the strongest possible terms, the actions that have led to the loss of so many lives in Gaza. He said that according to various reports, at least 60 people were killed yesterday, including at least 6 children, while more than 1,300 people were reportedly injured by live ammunition and rubber bullets. You will recall that in a statement we issued yesterday, the Secretary-General said that Israeli security forces must exercise maximum restraint in the use of live fire. Hamas and the leaders of the demonstrations have a responsibility to prevent all violent actions and provocations. With tensions high and more demonstrations expected in the coming days, the Secretary-General said that it is imperative that everyone show the utmost restraint to avoid further loss of life, including ensuring that all civilians, and particularly children, are not put in harm's way. The ongoing violence underscores the urgent need for a political solution. The Secretary-General reiterates that there is no viable alternative to the two-state solution, with Palestine and Israel living side by side in peace, each with its capital in Jerusalem. The Secretary-General is currently in Brussels, where he arrived a few hours ago. He just met with Donald Tusk, President of the European Council. From there, he went on to meet with Didier Reynders, Vice Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belgium. Later this evening, the Secretary-General will be hosted by Belgium's Prime Minister, Charles Michel, for a working dinner. Earlier today, the Secretary-General was in Vienna, where he delivered remarks at the R20 Austrian World Summit. The summit brings together international leaders from politics, the business and investment worlds, civil society, academia, and startups to work together and show leadership on implementing the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Secretary-General told the gathered leaders that of all the challenges he is faced with every day, few loom so large as climate change. If we fail to meet this challenge, he added, all other challenges will just become greater and threaten to swallow us. Acknowledging the summit's focus on subnational and local efforts, the Secretary-General underscored the need for financing to reach the people and places that need it most. He said that mobilizing and equipping local governments with the capacity and financing to accelerate climate action is necessary if we are to bend the emissions curve. On the sidelines of the meeting, the Secretary-General had 2 separate bilateral meetings with the Prime Minister of Denmark, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, and with the Prime Minister of Norway, Erna Solberg. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, expressed concern today about a possible upsurge in violence in Burundi during the run-up to Thursday's controversial constitutional referendum. A recent deadly attack on a village left 26 civilians dead, and even as there are differing accounts on who the attackers may have been, Zeid said that in this febrile atmosphere it was a very dangerous development. Burundi is awash with rumors, political negotiations are deadlocked, and tensions are rising sharply in the wake of this attack, he said. Zeid took note of the authorities' announcement that they are launching an investigation and urged them to ensure it is transparent and credible. Everyone will suffer if Burundi explodes into violence during or after the referendum, he said, urging the government to live up to its responsibilities. The Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, is making good progress towards the production of a framework for negotiations, as promised in his briefing to the UN Security Council in April. He plans to put that framework to the Security Council in the first half of June, and looks forward to a formal relaunch of peace negotiations afterwards. Mr. Griffiths is grateful for the continuing unhindered and prompt access he continues to enjoy with all the parties. He wishes to correct any impression that the postponement of his visit to Sana'a has in any way impeded his access to Ansar Allah leaders to better understand their own perspectives on his framework for negotiations. The Special Envoy continues to ask the parties to take urgent measures to de-escalate. There's a press release out with more details. Staffan de Mistura, the Special Envoy for Syria, spoke to reporters in Astana today, saying that he and his technical team had participated in a useful 9th meeting in Astana with some concrete discussions on de-escalation. He said that the issue of Syrian territorial integrity and national unity was clearly stressed by everyone. He added that the UN participated very actively in a working group where the guarantors had constructive engagement on the issues of detainees, abductees, and missing people. Meanwhile, yesterday, an interagency United Nations Syria Arab Red Crescent mission visited the towns of Sakba and Kafr Batna in eastern Ghouta. This was the first United Nations access to eastern Ghouta since it delivered assistance to Douma on the 15th of March. During the visit, the mission visited medical facilities, schools, and a local market. They observed the destruction of infrastructure, with over half of Sakba damaged or destroyed. 6 schools in Sakba are functioning, and interventions are ongoing to rehabilitate additional educational facilities. The United Nations continues to call on all parties and those with influence over them to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, and to allow safe, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian access to all in need, in line with their obligations under international humanitarian law. The UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan today released its second anti-corruption report, which takes stock of the progress made to fight corruption in the country and provides recommendations to move forward. The head of the mission, Tadamichi Yamamoto, said that while Afghanistan has made significant and notable progress in fighting corruption, new reform strategies and laws have yet to be fully applied to bring tangible benefits to the daily lives of Afghans. It has become clear that all Afghan institutions, along with all segments of society, must now engage in fighting corruption to rebuild integrity, accountability, and transparency in the country with a long-term agenda, said Mr. Yamamoto. The full report is available on the mission's website. Our humanitarian colleagues are warning that the situation in the Central African Republic has been deteriorating for several months in the interior of the country, with outbreaks of violence also reported in the capital, Bangui, in the past month. According to health workers, the outbreak of violence in Bangui has left 61 people dead and 330 wounded. An estimated 10,000 people have been displaced within the city due to insecurity. The displacement has an adverse effect on access to already scarce resources, such as drinking water. Parents are also reluctant to send their children to school due to fear of further violent attacks. Humanitarian needs in the country have increased, with 2.5 million people in need this year, compared to 2.2 million in early 2017. And our colleagues at the World Food Programme warned today that without urgent humanitarian assistance, more than 30,000 people forced to flee an upsurge in violence in the Central African Republic to seek refuge in Chad face hunger and destitution. WFP and the UN Refugee Agency, working with the Chadian government's Refugee Commission, have provided initial assistance, including food, shelter, essential non-food items, and medical care. But the relief effort has been hampered by a lack of funds. WFP needs $10 million to provide continued food and nutrition assistance to the refugees and members of host communities during the next 6 months. The current influx of mostly women and children brings to 100,000 the number of Central African refugees living in Chad. Stop attacks on children. The executive director of UNICEF, Henrietta Ford, made this call in a statement today, saying that from the Central African Republic to South Sudan and from Syria to Afghanistan, attacks on children in conflict have continued unabated during the first 4 months of the year. With little remorse and even less accountability, parties to conflict continue to blatantly disregard one of the most basic rules in war, the protection of children. Ms. Ford denounced indiscriminate attacks on schools, hospitals, and other civilian infrastructure, abductions, child recruitment, besiegement, abuse in detention, and denial of humanitarian assistance. She stressed that despite funding shortfalls, UNICEF is resolutely committed to serving the most vulnerable. Her full statement is online. And today, we thank our friends in Indonesia, as that member state has paid its regular budget dues in full. This payment takes the honor roll to 94. And today is the International Day of Families. The theme this year is Families in Inclusive Societies and explores the role of families and family policies in advancing Sustainable Development Goal 16 in terms of promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. And today at 1:15 p.m. in Conference Room 6, there will be a panel discussion on the day's theme organized by the Division for Social Policy and Development of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. At 11 a.m. in S237, which is this room, there will be a press briefing by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs to present the latest urban population estimates and projections, 2018 revision of world urbanization prospects. Speakers will be John Wilmoth, Director of the Population Division in DESA, and François Pelletier, the Chief of Population Estimates and Projections section, also at the Population Division. And sometime after this briefing, as you know, as the Security Council meeting wraps up, the permanent representatives of France, the Netherlands, Poland, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Belgium, Italy, and Germany will speak to you at the Security Council stakeout. And last, I want to remind you that today at 6:30 p.m., the Permanent Observer Mission of the State of Palestine, and the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People will hold a commemorative concert on the 70th anniversary of Al-Nakba in the UN General Assembly Hall. That's it for me. Yes, Masood.
Thank you, Farhan. My question is, why is Secretary General, after the killing of 58 Palestinians, and now today, while they were burying their dead, one more Palestinian was killed by Israeli fire, why is Secretary General's response so muted? And why is he not responding more forcefully to Israeli, talking to Israeli to stop this violence? But this thing is going to go out of control, and he knows it. So why is he so muted, and why is he so scared of Israel? Thank you.
While you're certainly entitled to your opinion, I would disagree with the idea that it's been muted. The Secretary General spoke several times over the course of yesterday about the violence, and I would refer you to his remarks. He put out a statement. He's tweeted on social media, and today his envoy, Mr. Mladenov, spoke at great length. As I just said at the start, he had called on everyone to condemn in the strongest possible terms the actions that have led to the loss of so many lives in Gaza. And we have called, as you know, for the Israeli forces to exercise maximum restraint, and for Hamas and the leaders of the demonstration to exercise their responsibility to prevent all violent actions and provocations.
Yes, sir. What I'm saying is, it seems that Robert Colwell, the human rights has a better called for more of investigation, which the United States has, of course, vetoed that statement. But the thing is the Secretary General again going to insist on investigation, which he has been calling for, but it's still not going on?
He has called, as he has since the start of this violence, for all such killings to be investigated thoroughly, and we continue to make that call.
Will he set up an investigation?
Hold on. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. One of the major foundation for this room, for this building, for this organization is human right. But lately, when I say lately, in past maybe 10 years, human rights has been taking the back seat when it comes to United Nations. Is United Nations becoming irrelevant when it comes to human rights? Is human rights itself becoming irrelevant or all above?
No, I don't believe that's the case. The UN continues to press for human rights. As you know, we have a very strong human rights entity, including the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the work of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and the previous Secretary General and this one have pushed the Human Rights Upfront initiative, which tries to centralize a lot of focus on human rights issues throughout the system. And so we're doing as much as we can. For us, the key question is, will the governments of the world pay as much attention to human rights as they do to political or economic considerations? We are pushing them to do so, but ultimately that push needs to also come from the people, from the media, from all quarters, so that all governments take the question of human rights seriously.
To follow up, you just mentioned that if the governments pay attention, but if nobody hold them accountable for the situation, nobody will say, okay, that's 60 people who died yesterday, just tough luck, it was a mistake.
Well, the United Nations tries to do as much as it can from our perspective to push governments on human rights concerns. But it needs to come from a variety of quarters. Ultimately, pressure needs to come from the people and from all the institutions that represent the peoples of the world, as well as from the United Nations. That's how it's most effective.
Thank you.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, there have been various calls in the Council for a transparent and independent investigation of the killings in Gaza. And you were saying that the Secretary General, is calling for such an investigation, but as many have pointed out, he has the power to set up such an investigation. Can you explain his reasoning in at least thus far not doing so? And also there's been a request that he provide a report on the implementation of the resolution in December 2016 on settlements. And is he aware of that, and when will he do that? So there's two separate questions, investigation, implementation.
Well, first of all, regarding the question of investigations, we've made clear repeatedly now that we want there to be credible investigations. Ultimately, what we're doing at this stage is pressing for the authorities responsible, in other words, in Israel, in Gaza, and elsewhere, to mount credible, independent investigations. We'll have to evaluate whether that happens and whether the results are satisfactory.
When you say elsewhere, what do you mean? When you say you're calling on for an investigation by Israel, Gaza, and elsewhere?
Well, and also the Palestinian Authority, which is present also, as you know, in the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
But what's his reasoning for not doing it himself? I guess that's what I'm saying. There are many council members that have said that he has it within his power to do it. Is there some legal reason? Is it a political judgment?
Well, you're aware of the process by which UN investigative bodies get mandates, and that is something that we would need to be apprised of if that were a consideration down the line. But at this stage, our focus is seeing what the authorities themselves can do. Yes.
Thank you, Farhan. I sympathize with you. You are on the hot seat today, definitely. But given the gravity of the situation, I must follow up on Masoud's question and say why Secretary-General is afraid to depart the common narrative on the situation, because the situation is not common. Why he is not speaking more strongly? You said he speaks strongly, but why he is not speaking more strongly? And what is his position on this, to be very clear, on this investigation, on the commission that, for example, Netherlands just a few minutes ago mentioned and called for, and others. And also others are saying we are reaching the situation to point of not return. So the situation is not as usual.
And that is a warning that the Secretary-General and his officials, including Mr. Mladenov, have also been making. We can differ about the relative strength of what the Secretary-General has been saying. He, as you know, balances the strong calls on leaders to avoid the violence, which he's been doing now regularly for several months, with also his efforts to see whether diplomacy can bring the parties back to the table. Ultimately, what is needed is for the violence to be halted and for the parties to engage in negotiations with each other. That's the only route out of the sort of madness and cycle of violence that we've seen. And this is something that Secretary-General has long believed and has repeatedly articulated. And regarding the questions of a commission, obviously you've heard from different member states, and we're also monitoring what the member states say about this. But we'll follow what sort of support they have for the various proposals.
When you say,
Up,
please.
Yeah.
When you say he is voicing his concern, his call, his appeal to leaders, does he still have to proceed with that kind of common call to all parties, or the party who use excessive force this time? And it's obviously Israel.
Well, you've seen what he said. You've seen what Mr. Mladenov said. For example, one of the things that he made clear is that Israel has a responsibility to calibrate its use of force, to not use lethal force except as a last resort under imminent threat of death or serious injury. It must protect its borders from infiltration and terrorism, but it must do so proportionately and investigate in an independent and transparent manner every incident that has led to a loss of human life. Hold on. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stefan. In the same statement he made on events in Gaza, the Secretary General also underscored the need for political solution. Reports, as you know, indicate that President Trump would be submitting a peace plan in the next few weeks. Has the Secretary General been consulted on any aspect of this peace plan?
We will evaluate the plan once we see it. I'm not aware of the details of any such plan. Yes.
Thank you. 100% I agree with you that both sides has to come and start negotiating. But in order to both sides to negotiate, has to be a stick, has to be a carrot. What are the sticks, what are the carrots in this situation?
That's something that ultimately the UN and the various concerned nations of the world need to work together to achieve. Different countries, different regional groups have sway with the different parties, and we need to bring them back to the table. We are trying on our side to do that, and we will see what our colleagues can also do. Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Farhan, on this thing about when the member states were so tied up in the Security Council, when they say something, it's being vetoed, and they're unable to move ahead at all, is the Secretary General going to propose anything that he believes is in interest of, and because of it's a threat to international peace and security? Is he going to propose any new measures to be adopted to make sure that this thing doesn't explode, which it is about to, the situation in Gaza?
Well, you've seen what we've been telling the various parties, and we're continuing with that approach. Let's see where we can go with that. If other steps are needed, we can approach it at that point. Mushfiq?
Thank you, Mr. Farhan. On Bangladesh, you are urging for peaceful, free, and credible election for a long time from this podium, and the Secretary General is willing to see. But I am wondering, what's the best possible way to hold a free, fair, credible election in Bangladesh? Because just yesterday, the one major mayoral election of Khulna ended with widespread irregularities and shows of muscle by the ruling Awami League activities on later today. So the polls was marked by the irregularities, including ballot stuffing, driving out of the agents of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and obstructing voters to enter the polling station as the administration were silent, and sometimes they helped to go ruling authority activities for these irregularities. So what is your observation on these issues?
Well, as you pointed out, we continue to call for the need for all parties and all authorities to respect the need for free and fair elections in Bangladesh, and we'll continue to do that. Yes.
Sure. Just on today's topic in the Council, the White House has put out a preview of the Secretary General's meeting with President Trump on Friday, and said, listing two countries, not the Middle East, Palestine or Israel, but listing Syria and North Korea as topics of mutual concern. Does the Secretary General also reform and efficiency? But does the Secretary General intend to raise this topic during his meeting Friday? Because it seems from the listing that maybe the administration doesn't view the UN its role as useful on this topic as it does apparently on Syria and North Korea.
Well, we'll bring up a range of topics of mutual concern. We'll provide those details following the meeting on Friday.
Is it your understanding if there'll be a Q&A session of the President and Antonio Guterres?
I'm not aware of that at this stage, but if there's one, we'll provide the details.
And I want to ask you about on the DRC, and I'm sorry if it's obviously reported that the 13 Beninois peacekeepers were taken hostage or taken, and that 11 have been returned. Is there any update? Have the two been found, and what can you say about it?
Yes, we can confirm that 2 peacekeepers are missing since last Friday. They were on a part of a MONUSCO convoy from Kangolo town to Kalemi town in Tanganyika province. MONUSCO teams are mobilized and deployed on the ground, searching for the 2 peacekeepers. Yeah.
Sure. At yesterday's town hall meeting in Vienna, one of the questions from the floor was from a self-described victim of sexual harassment within the UN system, and she asked the Secretary General whether he supported the idea of a Me Too club, I guess within the UN in Vienna. He didn't seem to say yes. He seemed to say, if I understand it better. And she said, do you support it? And then they just moved on. Can you say now, does the Secretary General support the idea? She was apparently rejected by the UN in Vienna to set up such a club. Does he support that idea, and will he follow up with the staff member who asked him this explicitly in the town hall meeting?
Well, first we're trying to get input from all staff about what needs to happen in order to deal more effectively with sexual harassment. including through a survey of staff. And so we'll try to evaluate what staff broadly say and see what steps need to be taken.
Okay. He also seemed to say that that I don't know if that the assessed contributions, that the reform of the development system had passed through silence procedure. It still hasn't been voted on, but he seemed to say that it's passed, but without the resident coordinator system being funded through assessed contributions. What's his plan, given that it seems like he thinks that now it's going to be approved by the General Assembly as it passed through? What is the plan to actually fund these resident coordinators?
Well, first we're going to see what the final results are once the member states agree on it. We hope in the coming days we'll be able to provide some details about what the development reform is about. Yes.
Thank you, Farhan. You said in your opening remarks that, quoting a report by UNAMA, that corruption has come down in Afghanistan. You know that corruption is an invisible phenomenon. How do they determine that corruption has come down?
I just refer you to the full text of the report. It's got details about its methodology there. Have a good afternoon.